For our private secondary school, it's just seventh generation secondary school, and that serves 15 of the First Nations in the Treaty 3 area, where we have satellite campuses or satellite classrooms. So the teacher travels to the communities, and instead of the other way around, where the students would be bused to a site. So that's the kind of the difference. The students that access this program, although we've gotten a little bit younger over the years in terms of maybe students that aren't being successful in the mainstream institute or mainstream school, they would, like the one-on-one type of teaching and tutoring that happens. It's an alternative style school, meaning it's a combination of online courses and booklets in order to attain your credits in your diploma. The difference, one of the differences too, is that had mentioned earlier, is that the students that access our private secondary school have to reside on the First Nation. So if it's at Couchiching, you have to live on Couchiching just because of the tuition dollars, if you want to call it that, and so that's kind of the difference there. The teachers provide a lot of one-on-one instruction, so they have to be kind of a jack of all trades, where they're working on math with one student 1 minute, and then maybe geography or English the next minute. We've over the years, we've graduated a lot of students, some as old as 66, 65 years old, to some that are your normal graduating age, and everywhere in between. It was built around, the school itself was addressing a need that we found with our carpentry apprenticeship program way back in 1990, where some of the candidates in that program were struggling with the math parts of the apprenticeship program. So back then it was decided to develop a private secondary school to address some of those needs, so they could fill maybe some of the gaps in terms of the math or whatever else. And so it was kind of born from there, and it just kind of snowballed, because we were finding that there was a lot of students that life had gotten in the way. Many of the students were between the ages of 20 and 30 years old, so just social assistance on our First Nations, not really going anywhere in terms of life in general, and so it was an opportunity for them where they were able to access, not have to travel, because sometimes that's a barrier where there isn't transportation. So we were able to bring the schooling to them, and they can learn on their own. How it's changed a little bit in the last 5 years is with technology. We have things such as Google Classroom and courses that are online, with the province opening up the e-learning types of courses being able to be accessed by First Nations, which they weren't allowed to access previously, another barrier. So there's been lots of little changes to help meet the needs of the students. It's been, like I said, very successful. We probably graduate somewhere around 40 students every year on average from that program. Some graduations we've had between post-secondary and secondary, probably like 200 grads. So I guess what I could add is that sometimes life's gotten in the way, single mom has a couple of kids or whatever, and now she realizes that she needs to get some education in order to, provide for her family or whatever it may be. So it was kind of built for those types of individuals that didn't have the opportunity, say as a young 17-year-old or whatever it may be. So it was really designed to help them have that opportunity. and how it's grown a bit in the last 5 years or so has been a little more focuses on opportunities and where you're going after you graduate from grade 12, because as we know, grade 12, yeah, it's a great achievement, but the doors aren't fully opened in a lot of areas. And so we've been working a lot with our students in the last 5 years just to make sure that they understand the opportunities, whether it's college, university, or employment or training, whatever it may be, working with them on those opportunities. I don't like to use the word pathways in that. I think it's opportunities for students to continue that lifelong learning journey. And so that's how that has been designed, as that school, the private school has been designed that way. Within our courses, the content and whether it's a novel or a video or whatever, as focuses on Indigenous content or learning. Participation in things like fall harvest and things like that also help the students. There's always that ability for the students to access elders. Some of the questions are, interview an elder or whatever it may be, in whatever course. So I think it's and again, a lot of the learning styles and the ways of knowing and that are built around a one-on-one basis between elder and youth and those types of things. And so I think having the teacher, and it's a lot of one-on-one, there's those supports that if you're in a mainstream classroom, I mean, the teacher can only give so many supports when there's 25 students in there. They can't spend that 20 minutes with you, where this is a little bit different. And so I believe that a lot of our students like the comfort level of seven gens. Not everything, whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, the mainstream setting sometimes just doesn't work for some people, and we have some of those students too, is that it just doesn't work for them. They'd rather be the one-on-one and those types of things. So it's just about the school itself addressing the needs of some learners that maybe wouldn't have that opportunity. And obviously with Seven Gens, the incorporation of the Indigenous content and that is key. So that's been a no-brainer for a while, where a student who maybe isn't in the program talks to a friend that's on the community saying, hey, you should come up, so and so is a great teacher. It's a couple days a week, and 20 lessons equals a credit. We could be graduated in this kind of the promotion from other students. But the number of graduates has been the telling tale of the success of it. And I think where we're at now in terms of an Indigenous institute is, okay, so now that we've had these folks graduate, okay, where are they going? Are they going to employment? Are they going to post-secondary? Are they going to training? What are they doing? Good example, I talked about Garnet, that he was our 66-year-old graduate out of our adult ed program in Kenora, and he's now employed by Seven Gens as a student mentor within Manitou Bautig facility. So pretty neat story, and just he always encouraging the folks there, the young ones, to get their education and things like that. So he was valedictorian. He was good, man. Again, it doesn't differ a lot between post-secondary and secondary. Again, I think having those opportunities to learn language and culture as part of your education as a whole is really important. The Indigenous education in terms of the secondary level, again, is probably the content and having those opportunities to take courses, whether it's I don't want to say native studies, but where their content is incorporated in all the courses, whether it's English, math, whatever it may be, and the ability to have elders as part of your education, whether it's, like I said, I use the example of interviewing an elder or whatever it may be. those are important things to have as part of Indigenous education. But again, I said it's a tough question because if you ask people on the community, Indigenous education means something different as well. It means about learning off the land and learning its traditions and culture, and so I think Seven Gens, from what we've done and tried to incorporate, we account for that in our programming, is making sure there's those opportunities there, and working with our communities. Again, communities are a key resource to help our students be successful. Well, I think for a secondary program, you know, getting having those same opportunities as, say, a student that's going to Fort Francis High School. And what I mean by that, access to e-learning, access to, dual credits, all the things that come with, your mainstream. It should be, because First Nation students and students that live on our First Nation communities should have the same opportunities as someone who doesn't. And if there isn't those opportunities, then there's a certain population that isn't getting the same type of access to a better future.
Right.
And we talked a little bit about technology and the importance of that. Like, let's ensure that we have the same types of technology that's happening at Fort High or a public board as there are on our First Nation communities. Are there challenges with that? For sure. I mean, we talk about connectivity and bandwidth. Lac La Croix First Nation doesn't have the same bandwidth as here. And that was one of our challenges with this building. We talked about the virtual classroom and that. Well, how do you have a virtual classroom with someone in Lac La Croix if they don't have the same bandwidth? How do you... This building means that you could have the fastest internet in the world, but if they can't connect to it, it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So those are some of the barriers that you see with our First Nations, but then the other part of it too is, if you're working in Lac La Croix, all of a sudden, okay, so we got the bandwidth there, but it's going to cost each household, whatever, $100 a month or $90 a month. Well, a lot of our First Nations families can't afford an extra $90 a month to access this bandwidth. So again, there's a barrier. And so there's those little things like that, the logistics of it, to try and make this work. And that's where I believe Seven Gens comes in to help mitigate these types of barriers and help work within them. Well, again, I think with Seven Gens and some of the connections that we've had as Indigenous institutes in Ontario, is building those relationships between, if it's Connectivity Canada, that's, or whoever it may be, to help address some of these things. There's not going to... One thing that's that we find is, one size doesn't fit all with our First Nations. There's some First Nations that, for example, Rainy River First Nations, who upgraded their connectivity because they have the means to do it. They have impact benefit agreements with New Gold Mine. They had a land claim settlement. They have the means to do things where they don't have to rely on the government for funding. And, if we can get a lot of our First Nations to that point where they can prioritize what is needed instead of waiting for, the government, because the government can change. And when every time it changes, it puts some of our First Nations that much farther behind. In with the other parts of the world. And so we have to, as Seven Gens, we have done this, and as part of my job is to make sure that those opportunities are the same from Rainy River First Nations to Lac La Croix and everywhere in between. That's one of the challenges.